Good morning, everyone, to True North Now, Episode 2. Today I'm joined with Andrew Webley, CEO of the SmarterWeb company. We are currently streaming live on X. This will be uploaded on, I believe, YouTube and the True North page at a later time. But Andrew, now that you're here with us here, afternoon or evening where you are, morning where I am, how are you doing? How are you feeling? What are some of your thoughts with the market activity lately?
Yeah, so we're doing okay actually. It's been another busy day. Another pretty good day. The whole week's been, non-stop with lots of different things. We've been at different events in the UK. We've done lots of different things online. We've put out a few announcements. So I think we're in a better position at the end of the week than we were at the start of the week. So yeah, pretty good.
Excellent. So, some in the community perhaps are not familiar with who SmarterWeb is, who you are. Give us a rundown on that. How did the company start? What's your employee base size, for instance? Get into some details around the decision to adopt a Bitcoin treasury strategy. And of course, people are probably going to have like questions around profitability, core business, things of that nature. Please give us some insight into that.
Yeah, so I started my career in 1999. I joined a small company that became one of the biggest companies in the UK. It's the largest investment broker in the UK. They've got about a 40% market share. And I left that company being the head of online. So I normally describe it to people as a really well paid apprenticeship. It was great because we listed the business on the stock market, and it grew into a massive company. Um, when I sort of got to the end of my time there after 10 years, I wanted to set up my own business. So I'm a developer. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to build a content management system that I thought was, could be one of the best content management systems in the world. This is in the days before, everyone had a content management system for a website. A lot of people did, but not everyone. Everyone does now. So I built a system and then I built a business around the system. So everything that we do is designed around the system. How we service clients, how we support clients, how we build clients. Literally everything is focused around the system. What that means is that we can be incredibly efficient, which obviously translates, to the profitability of the business. So the business, it's been around for 15 years, and it's been profitable every single year in those 15 years. Only as a small business, but profitable nevertheless. What I decided to do, so obviously I love investing, and then I found Bitcoin almost 10 years ago. And then about 5 years ago, I found a company called MicroStrategy, obviously called Strategy now. And I thought it was the best thing in the world, taking a public company and taking Bitcoin and combining the two, basically, in simple terms. So I started investing in that. And then obviously as time went on, there were some others. And then, because I'm from the UK, I've lived in the UK all my life, my kids live in the UK. I felt probably about 2 years ago, maybe a slightly longer now, that, why doesn't the UK have such a thing, I still hold shares in Strategy, and I think I hold about six different Bitcoin related public companies at the moment. One in France, one in Japan, the rest are in America, I believe, off the top of my head, apart from obviously one that I hold in the UK. You know, um, so basically, I couldn't find a company in the UK. We all love where we live. We like other countries, but we also love where we live. We buy food from where we live, and all that sort of stuff. Um, so I kept looking. I was checking the news feeds every day, thinking, this is the most obvious thing in the world. Why isn't anyone doing it? It doesn't make any sense. And then it got to last year, probably the middle of last year, just after the summer, 2024, and no one was doing it, or they certainly weren't doing it how I thought it should be done. So I bit the bullet and I decided that I would list my business on the stock market, which is exactly what I did. We seriously started the process maybe December 2024. So it took about 4 months, something like that, between seriously starting it and being listed on the stock market. We listed on the stock market in April 2025, 25th of April 2025. Um, in the UK, we've got two stock markets. We've got the London Stock Exchange, and then we've got the Aquis Stock Exchange. You can trade them dependent on where you are in the world. Relatively easily. It's harder for people outside of the US, outside of the UK. It's getting easier in Europe, but we've got these two stock markets, and the Aquis is basically a growth market. So it's where smaller growing companies list because it's quicker to get listed and it's cheaper. What we've actually done, which is something I'm very, very proud of, is in just under 2 months of being listed, we've become the biggest company. There's almost 100 companies on Aquis. We started as one of the smallest, and today we are we're the biggest by far, probably more than twice, 2.5 times. The next one down. Today we passed £1 billion market cap. This year so far, bearing in mind we've only been listed for 2 months. We are the best performing UK equity by far, between the two markets. We're one of the most liquid stocks between the two markets. We're, off the top of my head, maybe in the top 50 of the liquid stocks. I saw some data earlier today from, my former employee, Hargreaves Lansdown, and we're the second most dealt equity, out of the global equities that they cover. So, it's certainly gaining some traction. And people are taking notice, I think, of what we're doing as a business. It's probably worth touching on the actual business, because that's the sort of the journey of how we got to here today. But I'm really proud of my business, and so I can explain that. So the best way of understanding the SmarterWeb company is to think that we are three things. So we're an operating business that's been around for quite a few years, that's profitable, that's got over 250 websites, clients, probably 30% plus reoccurring revenue, really good profit margins, because the work is, an element of it is reoccurring revenue, which is like a hosting model, really. And then the project fees, we're very, very efficient how we do those projects to a very high standard, but efficiently. So we're an operating business doing, web design, web development, and online marketing. And then we've got the middle prong, which is an acquisition strategy, which is something for the longer term, medium to long term, let's say. And then the third bit, which, obviously everyone wants to talk to me about, is, my belief of how you should manage your treasury. So for many years, myself personally, I haven't attached much value to the pound or the dollar or the euro. And what I believe, which has worked out quite well so far, is that Bitcoin is a much better thing to hold your assets in. So rather than holding whatever it is in your bank account, after your day-to-day living costs, of course, in terms of the money that you're saving for the future, if you hold it in Bitcoin, it's a better store of value. Simple as that. So as a business, because I set up the business, it's my vision, et cetera, et cetera. We do exactly that. It's no more complicated than that. So the excess capital, spare capital, whatever you want to call it, that we have in our business, I hold for the benefit of the business and therefore its shareholders in the asset that I believe is the best asset in the world. So, what a traditional company may do is they might hold some pounds, in cash. They might hold some pounds in, say, gilts, government bonds, effectively. They might hold, some equities or some, gold exposure or whatever. We simply hold our excess capital in Bitcoin because that's what I believe in. And they're the three prongs to the business. So an operating business, an acquisition strategy, and how we manage our treasury. And that, in a nutshell, is the SmarterWeb company.
That's a great overview. Thank you. And let's get into some specifics on the Bitcoin acquisitions. I have some notes here because I want to make sure that I'm very, very specific. You recently acquired approximately 104 Bitcoin. Your total holdings are about 346 Bitcoin. Average cost basis of around 105,000 and around 36 million US purchase. Does that sound about right in terms of your overall Bitcoin acquisitions? Perfect.
Yeah.
Now, I know that you have a path, an immediate near-term path that you want to set forth towards 1,000 Bitcoin. So let's talk about that. And also, once you hit that 1,000 goal, I know whether you can discuss too many details about it or not. Once you hit that 1,000 Bitcoin marker, what are some longer-term goals that you'd like to set for the SmarterWeb company in terms of acquisition?
Yeah, so so far we've got off to quite a good start with how we've deployed the treasury and generated new capital into Bitcoin. So what I want to do is I want to get to 1,000 Bitcoin. When we decided to list the business, myself and Tyler Evans, who's a non-executive director, and he and I are the people that set out the strategy together, for the future and the path that we're on. We said to each other that we want to get to 1,000 Bitcoin quicker than a very well-known company did it, who are amazing. And so what we said to ourselves is, wouldn't it be cool if rather than getting to 1,000 Bitcoin in 6 months, we could get to 1,000 Bitcoin in 4 months? Now, using publicly available information, you're 100% right with what you said. Our most recent disclosed Bitcoin holdings are. We updated the market on that recently. We always update the market because I believe in transparency and respect. So we treat our shareholders with respect by giving them transparency. What we can do, or what you can do rather, is you can look at the cash that the business has got from looking at the fundraising activities that we've done and the Bitcoin that we've got, and you can get to a figure of 700-ish Bitcoin, give or take, say 30, 40, 50, as where we are at, round about now. What we can't do is we can't say anything on top of what we've disclosed to the market, but you can see that we've got that pathway with the capital that we've got literally now. So that's quite good, because what that means is let's fast forward a week, for example. That will be approximately 2 months after we listed, and people can say there's a reasonable chance that they've got round about 7/10 of what they said they wanted to get within 4 months. So what we did recently is on Thursday morning, I believe, in the UK, so that would be yesterday, we actually announced a second fundraising strategy that we've got, which is it's a bit like in the States an ATM, where
I was just going to ask you about that. So perfect. Thank you for getting into that.
yeah. So if you view what we've done to date in terms of how we've raised funds, which has always been at the market in terms of the price, and has been with decent strategic investors who have been incredibly supportive, then you can see that we've got that strategy, and then we've got another strategy that we announced yesterday, which is that side of things. So that's a very long-winded answer of saying, I believe that we will comfortably beat my targets, but I wouldn't want to, and I'm probably not allowed to say, we're going to do it in, X months, for example, but it'll be well within 4 months, in my
Of
opinion.
course. And again, just want to make sure I have the details correctly. That's with Shard Capital. You have a subscription agreement of up to 21 million shares. They're doing an initial tranche or block of 7 million, I believe, right? And let's get into some details on that. In the UK, it doesn't seem like there is an easy way to do an ATM equity-like offering. So from my understanding, this is something rather unique that you've pioneered in terms of the UK market of how to raise capital and raise equity to buy Bitcoin. And how did you, without getting into too many details that you can't share, how did you come across that as a potential opportunity? And was it very, very difficult to get that approved and scaled, or was it a relatively straightforward process once you had the mechanism identified?
Yeah, so when I first decided to list the business, we've got great advisors. There's lots of different companies that we've worked with on the legal side, the accounting side, the broking side. But what I found in the early stages is, I would say, why are we doing it like that? Why aren't we doing it like this? This is too complicated. Let's simplify it, because, I'm an investor. And when I look at companies, I want, I don't want things to be complicated for unnecessary reasons. There's a lot of that goes on, which perhaps, in my opinion, isn't necessary. So it's quite funny, you see, because in the UK, and with my company, we had a lot of that going on at the start, and then as time has gone on, and I've shown them that the way that I think it should be done, seems to work. They've been more receptive to that. So what you can do in the UK, and people do it from time to time, but in a way that I don't like, because I don't believe the investors benefit. there are a way or ways that you can do deals with third parties, and they can effectively give you money rather than you placing it with traditional equity. So it's not dissimilar from the deal that we announced, but when you dive into the detail behind that, you'll see that the company's not doing as well as they should. They're almost being taken advantage of. So with our advisor, Tennyson Securities, we talked it through, and this has taken weeks. People only found out about it yesterday, but it took us weeks. We started talking. We said, look, this is what we want to do. This should be possible. I want the company to benefit from it. Not that the people facilitating the deal don't get a fair pay. They get approximately 3%, which is actually slightly better than when you do a fundraising, unless you've done the fundraising yourself. And is very comparable with how a large company, much larger than us, would do an ATM facility in the States. So I priced it around that because I thought that's what these other companies that are doing very, very good things do. But I didn't want there to be hidden fees, initial fees, all this sort of rubbish, which basically doesn't benefit the company and the investors. So it took a bit of time. It was I wouldn't say it was easy to do it. But it was just thinking, right, this is what we want to do. This should be possible. Let's get the appropriate advice from, the brokers, the lawyers, get all the paperwork drafted up, find a good partner that we can trust that's going to do it in a respectful way, and all those things. And, I'm really pleased. I'm really pleased with how we've put it together. Time will tell how well it works, and if it's a good way of generating additional capital for the business. I believe it will be. If you look at the details of what we announced, so I didn't want anyone to be scared when they read it. So that's why when I put in the announcement, which again was written in plain English, like everything else that I do, that's why I put, we will not sell those shares below the closing price of the previous day. So if the price closes at X, we cannot sell below X, and then the next day, the price closes at Y, we cannot sell below Y. So, in simple terms, you can't sell on a down day, yeah? And then I also put another clause in there saying you cannot sell more than 20% of the volume. So, obviously, if you're a liquid stock, there's volume, so it wouldn't work if you didn't have liquidity. But I wanted people to realize that, yes, being perfectly honest, there will be a slight impact on the price because, the company has got the right, if they want to sell, a modest amount of shares. But I didn't want people thinking that, we're just going to be, putting a lid on the price or anything, because that's not the intention. The intention is to get the balance right for the shareholders by generating new capital for the business. And then the final thing we did, so you said about the 21 million shares, that's what we put into the facility. 21 million shares at the current share price is approximately £100 million of new capital, equity capital with no debt, no strings, nothing. So what we didn't want to do is we didn't want to scare people and them to think that that's such a big number. Obviously, I wanted the 21 million number for obvious reasons. So what we said is we'll put 7 million into the facility. And then if that gets a positive reaction over a period of time, then, we'll put another X, which might be 7 million, might be 14 million, obviously less than, no more than 14 million because the total's 21 million into the facility. And then once the facility is complete, we'll then, sort of potentially, do the same again if that's in the best interest of the companies. And when you get to the end of each tranche, we'll update the market and we'll say, right, we sold 7 million shares. The average price was X, therefore we raised X for the company. So it's a really cool, innovative thing that I'm hoping that other companies can see. And then they can think, yeah, that's a sensible way of raising capital in addition to, offering retail investors the opportunity, getting supportive institutional investors, and the other sorts of things that, we're doing on the equity side as opposed to anything else.
So when I take a look at what I read about your plan and what you just said, if we compare it to MicroStrategy, we all know they have the ATM equity offerings, and now they have multiple rungs that they can leverage in terms of leveraging ATM equity to buy Bitcoin. Then we have MetaPlanet that uses moving strike warrants, and they have somewhat of a sell into strength model. Now, your model, it seems like you have a far more aggressive approach towards being market neutral and selling into strength, if I'm understanding it correctly. If you are not trying to sell below the previous day's closing price and you're keeping that rolling forward, that means that as sentiment kicks up, you are selling into that sentiment. So I think that again, if it works, which you're hoping it does, and which everyone thinks it does, that is a somewhat novel approach. But the follow-up question I have with that is, I'm assuming that it's something that is scalable, so that if the 21 million works, then you can do 42, 63, so on and so on and so forth? Or will you have any kind of local regulatory caps that'll prevent you from scaling it?
No, so that's a great question. So when before I listed the business, I got everything. So I'm really proud of all the minute detail in the business, and that's what you see basically when you look at us as a whole. And every little bit of what we do, I've sort of looked at in the best possible light to make it perfectly structured, in my opinion, for the future. So what I did is before we listed the business, I made sure that we had more than adequate headroom. I haven't done the calculation in the last day or two, but what excess headroom means is, as a company, you've been given the authority by your shareholders to raise capital for the benefit of the business. And normally, what you've got in the UK, if you're LSE listed, there's a cap on that. It's currently at 20%, I believe. So you can raise 20%, of effectively of your market cap, 20% more shares. On the Aquis exchange, you can raise to your headroom. So if you haven't got enough headroom, then what you have to do is you have to go to your shareholders. There's a bureaucratic process that will take a couple of weeks to request the headroom. Obviously it costs money to do that sort of process, and then you get more headroom. So it's quite unusual in the UK to have a company like our company where we've got considerably more headroom than the shares in issue. So, as a ratio, and don't quote me on this, but, we've probably got 10 to 15% of the shares in issue relative to the actual headroom that's been authorized. And you get that authorization for a year. So hopefully everyone can see when they, get to know me, and, people can ask me questions, and, that's all good. They can see that I'm aligned like everyone else in the business. This is the most important thing to me financially in the world by far. And it's also a business that I'm very, very proud of. So hopefully they can see that, I won't abuse that headroom position, but I structured it like that so that, let's say the facility that we launched the other day goes very, very well, then exactly that, 42, 63, etc., etc. Whatever the liquidity and the demand allows. If you think about it, if you take a step back for a moment, we invest in companies because we want the share price to go up, and sometimes because we believe in what they're doing. The ideal scenario is both of those. Yeah, you believe in them and you think the share price is going to go up. So we're really saying with this, if you think about it at sort of like a psychological level, is that we're just saying that the company can be even more stronger, even stronger if the company has access to more capital. The balance sheet is therefore healthier. So, let us share in some of that price appreciation to grow the business, and trust us that we'll do it in a sensible way, so that, the share price can still move and things. So, if you think about the company with the share price today and yesterday as an example, both days were reasonable in the share price, how it went up. So I don't think people can say that the facility on a very, very short, sample of 2 days, doesn't have some merits. And I'm massively looking forward to, seeing how it goes and evaluating the progress and using it as, the second lever in our model. And obviously as we grow and grow and grow, then we'll have a third lever, a fourth lever, a fifth lever, and etc. So this is like, we've got another new tool in the toolbox. It's a really good tool, a proper power tool, in fact. And yeah, we're pretty excited about it.
So let's talk about some of those potential levers. So one of the things that we often hear about in the community is the talk of a Bitcoin treasury company or leveraged Bitcoin equity. However, I want to draw a distinction. At the moment, if my understanding is full and correct, you are a Bitcoin treasury company. You have done capital raises and you're using equity offerings, equity-like offerings, to put up Bitcoin on your balance sheet. But currently, you're not doing any leverage. You have not taken on any kind of convertible notes or anything to that nature. And this isn't me saying whether that is a good or a bad approach. What I want to bring up is, given the fact that you have these two levers, these two rungs that you can currently pull right now, and you mentioned that you would be looking into the future of having a third, fourth, and fifth, I would assume that convertible notes and other similar facilities would be on your radar, wouldn't they?
Yeah, yeah, of course. So, I look at everything. I'm an investor in, quite a few different companies in this space, have been for a very, very long time. And, I love what these different companies are doing. And I look at them and I think, well, that's good. That could work. And, that has worked and all these sorts of things. In the UK, the capital markets, you've got the same sort of tools as you've got in the US, Japan, France, etc. My job as the CEO is to decide what I want to implement and when I want to implement it. Um, you know, I I believe, in my opinion, that the best thing for our business is to be debt free, which we are, no debt, which is quite good. It means that should there be a downturn, there's no problem there. We've got an operating business that's been profitable for 15 years. So I think that I've got the model right as I see it in my head. Now when we get bigger and bigger and bigger, without putting a threshold on it, because obviously we've flown to that £1 billion level pretty quickly, actually. At some point it might be appropriate to effectively take a small amount of debt, as an example, which some of the companies have done fantastically well. I've already had lots and lots of people give me lots and lots of different deals, including deals that were nowhere near as good as the facility that I announced, the ATM-like facility. I've already been offered lots and lots of different things. Some of them are better than others, obviously. But there's some really good people that I get on very, very well that are very keen to do things. Some of those people have joined in our equity raises when I've said, we don't want to do like a convert, for example, at the moment. Others have said, well, we can't support you at this stage, and that's fine. That's their opinion. That's my opinion. What I think I will always do is I will do my very, very best to make sure that the business is run in a responsible way. Because this is, my life's work, my financial future, in addition to, the responsibility that I've got for all of those different shareholders. So I just need to be very, very careful about that. But I think what people can see is, using my ATM style facility, I can generate £100 million approximately of equity, equity, no debt. That's a pretty good number. We've got a treasury that's over £50 million already. A little bit more, the public available information would have to be used for that. So, that would get us to, 150 plus million pounds in our treasury, alongside the operating business that's profitable, obviously looking a bit small relative to that at that point. But that's so cool if you can do that with no debt. So I'm always looking at things because, every single day, every single week, I want to be in a better position than I was the day before, the week before. But I also want to, so I won't rule anything out, but I also want to make the right decisions at the right time. And I think that that's what a good CEO will do. And funnily enough, those right decisions aren't just, whether it's debt or equity, for example, but they're also things like how much do you raise? So in some of the raises that we've done, I think the last two off the top of my head, we've never scaled the retail investors down, but we've scaled some of the institutions down ever so slightly, because it's about getting the right amount of money at the right time. Every aspect of what we're doing as a business is something that I've modeled through all different financial scenarios as well. And, I think what we're doing at the moment is the right thing for the SmarterWeb company at the moment. And we have considered some alternative things. and we will consider them in the future. But I'm convinced that for the very, very short term, what we're doing is the right thing for the business and therefore its shareholders.
Awesome. So let's now talk about the reality of Bitcoin in the UK. So we all know what strategy is done, right? They've set the standard in terms of growth, in terms of Bitcoin acquisition. And as a contrast, we have MetaPlanet that exists in Japan. They are serving as a, not for lack of a better term, standalone vehicle for Bitcoin exposure in Japan. In the UK, you have some unique dynamics as well. For instance, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you cannot hold IBIT, for example, unless you are an institutional investor. Strategy serves as the primary form of Bitcoin exposure for the UK market, I would say, in terms of like a leveraged Bitcoin equity. And now you have SmarterWeb that's coming in the form of another option that didn't exist before in the UK market. Have you been hearing feedback from the local market, from local regulators, from local investors that are seeing it in that way? Are they starting to see SmarterWeb as a potential vehicle for Bitcoin exposure in the market? I know you have other companies in the UK that do have some Bitcoin on the balance sheet, and like you have Coincilium, I believe, that also is doing a treasury model. But what kind of feedback have you gotten from the local market in terms of what you're doing and what it means for local market in the form of like Bitcoin exposure?
Yeah, I think it's been pretty positive on the whole. So, I've invested in the States for, almost 20 years, maybe. The States are, it's the best market in the world. And then on the flip side of that, the UK market's been pretty poor for probably, you know, 10 years, maybe. It had a brief sort of pop, I suppose, over COVID, but it wasn't a real pop. It was just, people bored at home, sort of looking at UK stocks. I'm not sure whether any good companies sort of came out of that pop. Um, so, so the UK markets haven't been great. You're 100% right in the sense that it's quite difficult for private individuals in the UK to get Bitcoin exposure. So, I've been buying Bitcoin for many years. I know how to buy it. I know where to buy it. I know which banks I can use and all this sort of stuff. There's quite restrictive limits with some banks. For example, you might not be able to buy more than, £3,000 worth or £5,000 worth or whatever. There's some banks, where you can't buy any. They won't allow it. Or you have to do it in a different way because of, the platform that you use to get around, like using a card or a direct bank transfer, for example. And then, you pay much, much larger fees. So it's pure Bitcoin in the UK, ignoring the fact that some people aren't comfortable holding it through a wallet and things, it is a bit of a tricky one. And then the other thing that you've got is, even though in the States you've had, ETFs since, I believe it was something like March last year, in the UK you haven't got them yet. So that's why, or one of the reasons why, people have used Bitcoin treasury companies like MicroStrategy to get that exposure. The advantage also that you've got is in the UK, we've got things called pensions, SIPs, self-invested personal pensions, and ISAs, which is like kind of like the same as a pension, but you get the tax relief on the way out, because you don't pay any tax on the way out, but you don't get the tax relief on the way in. But same sort of product, just a basket to hold investments, and then they're free of tax until they come out, or whatever. So because a lot of people in the UK have got an awful lot of money in their pensions and their ISAs, they can't buy Bitcoin with that, because they can't buy pure Bitcoin because it's not allowed, and they can't have any access, or the vast majority of people can't have any access to ETFs, because you can't even buy the ones in the States, because the FCA has dictated that they are not suitable. So that will change, and that is changing. So the way that I look at it is that we follow a lot of things that happen in America. So I've always believed that if you had asked me 2 months ago, I would have said within the next 2 years we'll have Bitcoin ETFs in this country. They actually announced a couple of weeks ago that they're starting a consultation period, and I believe that probably by September, October, something like that, retail investors in the UK will be able to buy Bitcoin ETFs. That's what I believe anyway. So it's getting better. I think what we've done, which is quite a cool thing, and certainly wasn't the plan. I'm very focused on the Smarter Web company. This is about doing something that I believe in the right way, not doing the usual public company thing where they're, sort of not delivering or trying to deliver pure value for their shareholders. One sort of side effect that's come out of it, which is sort of quite comical actually, is you've got lots of other smaller companies coming out there saying, yeah, what about me? We've got a Bitcoin treasury policy now. And, it's quite surreal actually. When I check the news feeds at 7 o'clock every morning, I see that. Now, there are some great there is another good company that's doing that strategy, Coincilium. I will watch with interest to see how aggressively they do it, how well they manage it, and all that side of things. And I really hope that they succeed. But away from them, I'm not aware of anyone in the UK that is actively pursuing this strategy. I'm watching maybe 7 or 8 different companies, and I'm hoping that some of them start saying, right, we've bought some Bitcoin. This is what we're doing. This is our strategy. This is how we see, the model developing. But it's a really interesting time, and it's so fantastic to see the equity markets in the UK that have been pretty poor, to be fair, for many years, have some excitement again, and people say, oh, actually, I like what these guys are doing, and then get behind them and stuff. So, it's definitely one of those, surreal moments that's come out of what we've done, that, you've almost created something, and then a load of other stuff has been created alongside it. But just it's worth remembering that, really what we're doing is something that's worked incredibly well in other countries. So take any of them. An operating business with a Bitcoin treasury policy. The secret, which I don't mind sharing, because it's not really a secret, is it all comes down to the execution at the end of the day. So, I believe that most people, providing they're prepared to put the effort in, they can, come up with a simple version of what we're doing. But the execution of that is a little bit harder than some people think. And the work that goes involved in that, every single day to keep pushing it forward, is perhaps something that people underestimate. So
Takes a lot of endurance.
yeah, it does, and it is the best job in the world that I've got. There's so many people that have been so kind. Obviously you get the odd troll and things, but that's life. But there's so many people that have reached out and they've said, what you've done has changed my life. You've paid off my mortgage. You've paid for my holiday. You've allowed me to get married, or whatever. Like I went to an event the other night, and must have been 3 or 4 people came up to me, and one guy was, it was he was so emotional. I thought he was going to cry, because he said, it had changed his life. And it's such a, I feel so lucky to, have had that experience so far. And, as long as I can keep doing my job properly, pushing the company forward over many, many months and years, then I hope that we can help other people, providing they believe that it's the sort of thing that they want to invest in. And going back to the transparency point, we include things like, in our announcements, we include all the risk warnings and things, because we believe it's an opportunity that people should have, going back to the regulation piece. So we've given them that opportunity. But whether you're investing in us or you're investing in something else, you need to put the effort in and the time in and the work in to understand what you're investing in. And I think that's what investors need to do, whether they're investing in this space or anything else. They need to make sure that they understand what they're investing in, so they understand the risk that they're taking with things. Because when I invest in something, I look at the strategy, I look at who the people are, I look at their track record, I look at how hard they work or how hard I think they work, and all those things. And people need to be very aware of that stuff. But I believe that we're sort of doing things pretty well at the moment. We're certainly trying our best, and I've been really pleased with the reception that we've got, from the UK retail investors. We've got a great community that's built up on X and all this stuff, but also by the other players, whether it's the advisors or the other companies. It's quite cool to see that we've started something in the UK that's heavily inspired by the global players, but we've got that ball rolling, and that's something that I'm quite proud of as well.
Talking about that a little bit more, one of the narratives that strategy dealt with in the U.S. was when they launched their treasury plan and they started moving along with it and started scaling it, and then the news of the ETFs being approved came through. There was a narrative building that why would people own strategy? Why wouldn't they just buy the IBIT ETF? The IBIT ETF is going to eat into strategies, growth, and it's going to eat into their narrative of being worth a premium over their net asset value. Have you heard anything similar in the UK, considering that you mentioned that, while not right now, in the next X number of months, it may be possible that we are seeing some movement on the ETFs getting approved for the UK and being opened up to retail investors? And, how do you handle that? Because obviously, as a strategy investor myself, full disclosure to anyone watching, that is not a narrative I agree with. So I was just curious as to, are you hearing anything like that, and how would you plan on addressing that when someone inevitably brings it up as a consideration?
Yeah, so there's two ways that I think about that question actually. So on one hand, if you invest in a company that holds Bitcoin on its balance sheet, you are you're expecting some sort of return in excess of the return that you would get from holding Bitcoin, because otherwise you would hold Bitcoin.
Mhm.
So I hold Bitcoin myself, and I hold a lot more in Bitcoin treasury companies, including our own, of course. Now, that's not right for everyone, but that's what I think the best approach is for me and my family. So Bitcoin is obviously the best asset in the world by far. The only thing that's better than Bitcoin, in my opinion, is compound Bitcoin, or leverage Bitcoin, if you want to call it that. Not leverage in the traditional sense of the word, but basically Bitcoin that builds more Bitcoin for you. So when I think about a Bitcoin treasury company or a public company with Bitcoin on the balance sheet, I think about how are they going to get me more Bitcoin for my money? And it's as simple as that. So if I was investing in an ETF, for example, I would be doing that for convenience, maybe, or within one of the tax wrappers, but it's not quite the same product as, a Bitcoin treasury company, for example. So that's one of the things that I'd say there. The other way that I would answer it is I would say, over the eight, 9 years, whatever it is, that I've been investing in Bitcoin, I've heard loads of narratives and I've seen a few things that have been true as well. So, there's always a narrative of, and to be fair, for balance, there are narratives on why it may go up as well as why it may go down. I listen to these narratives in the sense that I try and keep my ear to everything, but I'm not really that concerned with any of them because if we look at Bitcoin historically, it's by far over the long term way better than anything else. And I believe that Bitcoin's going into the millions and then beyond, in a period of time. So I'm not really that concerned about these things because the only people that I hear saying things about ETFs are going to do that, I heard all of that last year and I got quite sick of hearing that in America, and if you look at what actually happened, because I'm a big believer in looking at data and numbers and working out the probability of things. If we don't even have to do that with this scenario because we can just look at what happened in America and how our strategy did afterwards. When the ETFs came out. So yeah, I'm pretty relaxed about it. I actually see it as a massive positive, because it's furthering the adoption. It's a rubber stamp from the FCA saying Bitcoin's not this bad, terrible thing that we've been telling you for 10 years, that we've been making you feel like a criminal for owning the best asset in the world. So I actually see it as a really positive thing when that happens. And anything that makes Bitcoin better makes Bitcoin within public companies better. Funnily enough, what we were talking about a moment ago about other companies cropping up, and that's why I said I'm really looking forward to companies that do it well, whether it's in the UK or anywhere else in the world, because anything that makes Bitcoin stronger makes us stronger. And that's one of the things that's really cool about it, in my opinion.
I'm inclined to agree. And I just had an exchange with a few people online that asked kind of a similar question about smarter web and strategy and whatnot. And I think the simplest way to think about it is kind of like what you just mentioned. you're not investing in it instead of Bitcoin because it's better than Bitcoin. You're saying that because of Bitcoin, you want a dollar for dollar proportional increase on the return you'll see. So they're looking for that 1.5 to 3x on top of Bitcoin. And many of us, I can't speak for you, but I know I've done it. I've held a variety of these different companies and instruments, and I've just bought more Bitcoin with the gains. So it is not a instead of Bitcoin, it is a because of Bitcoin that a lot of
Yeah.
these investments are. That's what strategy is. That's what Metaplanet, Similar Scientific, and I believe that's what you're trying to be as well. So, in closing, I think those are all my general questions that I had. This is just the first interaction I'm hoping to have with you on the True North Now platform. If you would like to share any closing thoughts with the live watchers we have on Twitter or X, sorry, keep calling it Twitter, please feel free to do so.
Well, I think the only thing that I'd like to say is, how grateful I am to everyone for getting behind us and supporting us. We are doing our best. We are working hard. We are trying to deliver, the stated strategy that we've made very, very clear to everyone. We've got an amazing community that's built up on X completely organically. There's, well, I can't really remember how many members there are now. It's going up,
It's grown fast. It's grown very, very fast. It has.
yeah, and
Yes.
it's I try and check in there every day and see what they're doing. There's some really cool tools that people are building. There's one guy, Nick B on X. I almost said Twitter as well then. And he's built this whole amazing smarter web dashboard. He's got the Webley tracker on there. He's putting the work in as well, just like we're putting the work in. And it's just amazing to see all this stuff. We're honored and humbled that people think that it's a company that they would like to support, and we take that support very, very seriously. And we're certainly doing our best. And outside of the UK, there's loads of conversations that I'm having with people all over the world, and that's amazing too. To have one of the things that I said at the start was I wanted to build a really big company that the UK could be proud of, and we're just starting that mission, obviously. But hopefully over the coming weeks, months, and years, we can fulfill that mission and then grow and grow from there. We could be, at the start, I said I want to be one of the biggest 100 companies in the UK. We're probably ranking with the biggest couple of hundred already, actually. But maybe we could become the biggest company in the UK. Who knows? And then just keep growing from there, and just be something that the UK can be proud of. A company with hardworking people that really is aligned with the shareholders and trying to deliver things as best they can. And I'm just grateful that people have supported what I set out to do. It means a lot to me.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today. Thank you for all of those that are watching us right now. We will probably be on next week for another episode. I plan on having Andrew on again as well. And I just want to extend my thanks to the entire community that follows True North, that has been following me, that has been following, Jeff and Ben and Soleil and Tim and all of us that are in the True North community group, that we really, really appreciate it. And look forward for more content coming from us. But for now, for this episode, I'm going to say goodbye. I'm going to end the live stream now. Andrew and I are going to just chat for a little bit before he gets back to being crazy busy like he has been. And thanks for joining, and everyone enjoy your weekend. Bye.